You're listening to episode 471 of The Holy Post. On today's show, we look at an article in Salon that argues conservative Christians are less moral and empathetic than atheists and secularists. It largely comes down to the way different groups have responded to the pandemic and climate change. But is the real problem that evangelicals are less moral, or are they simply more likely to be deceived and distrusting of science? Then we talk about the tragedy unfolding in Afghanistan. Christian shares a touching story about her son's deployment to the country, and I talk with Matthew Soerens from World Relief about the unfolding refugee crisis. What obligation do we have to the thousands of Afghans who helped the U.S. military over the last 20 years? And with U.S. evangelicals among those least likely to welcome refugees into the country, will they make an exception to those refugees from Afghanistan that helped our military? All of that, plus a strike at Nabisco is threatening the country's Oreo supply, which launches Phil into a rant about different cookie varieties and what this all means about late-stage capitalism. Before we get into the episode, I have some good news for our Patreon supporters. Earlier this week, I did a 1-hour bonus interview with David French from The Dispatch about Afghanistan. David French is an attorney, a writer, and an Iraq War veteran, so he has unique insights into what's happening right now in Afghanistan. He and I spend the hour unpacking how the U.S. got into this mess, what mistakes were made as we sought to exit that country, and what our moral obligations are to the Afghans we've left behind. But David and I go even deeper. We don't just look at missteps and errors that may have been made by President Obama or Trump or Biden. We look at what this whole episode reveals about the nature of American society and culture. Do we still have a sense of moral obligation to the world, and can we sustain sacrifice over time? This is a really interesting conversation, and I'm so glad we can share it with our Patreon supporters. If you're not a Patreon supporter, this is a great week to sign up and get access to this kind of bonus material. So go to holypost.com and click the Support Us button at the top, and you can learn more about the different tiers of support and the access you get for joining part of the Holy Post team. Thanks to everyone who's already become a Holy Post supporter and makes this show possible, and I hope you enjoy the conversation with David French this week. For everyone else, here's episode 471.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. This is Phil Vischer. I am here with Christian Taylor. Hi, Christian.
Hello.
Welcome back. Good to have you on the show today.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
And Sky Jatani. Hi, Sky.
Hello.
Is that a Miami of Ohio hat that you're wearing?
Yes, it is.
Because you had to take your daughter back to school?
Yes, I did.
Is that why? And all you got out of it was a big bill and a hat?
Yeah, actually, that's pretty much exactly what I got out of it.
Yeah.
I got a lot of tears.
Oh, did you take? Because he took his daughter to school?
No, I got a lot of tears because I took my very last child.
Oh, you did?
To college yesterday.
Oh.
And that was not easy, particularly when he was sobbing when we left. And we did not expect our 20-year-old son. And you guys, he said, "Mom and Dad, you gave me a really great childhood."
Oh.
And I was like, oh my goodness.
That's going to bust you up.
That was a very different departure than I had with Zoe, because as Amanda and I were leaving, she said, "Hey, do you mind dropping me at this frat house?" We're like, "Oh, sure." Because,
and I hope you said, "Yes, I do.
You're going to walk there anyway.
And I'm not going to.
Her close girlfriend was meeting her at this frat house. I'm like, okay, this is great.
Boy. And Jason Rugg. How's it going, Jason?
Hey there. Pretty good.
Did anyone drop you off at college yesterday?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. And here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. Okay, there's a lot of bad things happening in the world.
That could be the headline for everything in the past 6 years.
There are a lot of bad things happening in the world, and here is yet another one. Nabisco bakers across the U.S. are on strike, potentially disrupting Oreo supply.
I thought that was all like mechanized. There's actual bakers involved?
Yeah, oh, yes, they're elves. They're little tiny elves in a tree, and they make Oreos.
I thought elves is like a euphemism for microchip.
You think a microchip can make a cookie? Is that
Yeah.
what you think, Sky? You
Yes,
think
I
a
do.
microchip can make? Are you eating digital food right now?
No, but like all the machines that run in these factories that produce these
Uh-huh.
mass quantities
Uh-huh.
of stuff,
And
it's got to be
you think
computerized, right?
no people are required. You just think no people. You think people are superfluous to the manufacturing process. Is that what you think?
In some cases.
Hundreds of workers at Nabisco bakeries across the country are on strike over a proposal to change their work shifts and healthcare benefits. But enough about that. It could disrupt the Oreo supply. So, okay, here's the thing that I want to bring up about this, because do you remember when you were kids? Jason, you're still a kid, so it won't be very hard. And you would go to the cookie aisle or you would go to the candy aisle, and there was like, in the cookie aisle, there's one Oreo thing, there's one next kind of cookie, and one of the next kind of cookie. And in the candy aisle, there's a box of Snicker bars, a box of Milky Way, a box of Kit Kats, and now you go to the cookie aisle, and there's like 3 feet of Oreo varieties.
Yep.
You go to the candy aisle, and there's 2 feet of M&M varieties, then 2 feet of Snickers varieties, and then there were like 8 flavors of Kit Kats the last time I counted. So it's the same thing that you see in like the toothpaste aisle, where it used to be, do you want Crest or Colgate? And now, which one of these 30 different Crests do you want, or these 25 different Colgates do you want, in different packaging with different colors and flavors? So the kind of morphing of the loss of the little guys all being sucked up by the big guys, and that we're more comfortable buying brand extensions of a brand we trust than trying something new. Like,
Yeah,
I don't get, I don't get lemon cookies. I actually get lemon Oreos.
this is the natural progression of late stage capitalism.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
This
it
is
is.
exactly this is what
And
happens.
Sky should know this because he wrote a book called Divine Commodity. And if you guys who are listening haven't heard about this book, it was one of his very first
Where's
ones.
Taco? Taco.
I'm getting Taco.
Where's
Almost
Taco?
forgot about
We got to
Taco.
hold this thought. I can't move on until you ding. I can't move on until you
Where
ding.
is
I
it?
already mentioned like 10 brands already, and you didn't ding a single one of them.
You're
You
right,
can't even
you're
find
right.
Taco.
You're
Man, if I were Taco, I would go on strike against you, pal. I was okay. Ding.
There we go.
I
There you
did.
go.
I mentioned 10 brands. I need 10 dings. Oh, wow. All right. Here. Do you need help carrying that to your car, sir? Okay. Here's my point. My theory is that because of this dynamic, okay, that brands like Oreo are now too big to fail. Because if Oreo went down, like a third of the cookie aisle would be empty.
But you're talking about Nabisco though.
Yeah, I am.
Like Nabisco's too big to fail.
Yeah, and now Nabisco is a part of an even bigger company. It's owned by Mondelez, a European conglomerate.
So now the workers are not protesting because there's too many varieties of Oreos and it's stretching them. Okay, so they're protesting over like pay and benefits.
Oh, yeah, something about healthcare, or I don't know what.
You're not concerned about the human workers involved here. You're concerned about, am I going to have the same variety of cookies in my cookie aisle?
I am concerned that rampant capitalism has left us in a state where we already know this, that certain banks are too big to fail. Certain insurance companies are too big to fail, that the government literally has to step in, suspend the free market to keep these behemoth bank brands from going under. And I'm just wondering if the same thing is happening in the snack food aisle. Kit Kat is too big to fail, and we got to prop up Kit Kat if it's in danger.
You need to be careful, Mr. Vischer, because I saw on Twitter there are people that are calling you a leftist and a progressive, and this conversation is not helping your cause.
No, but I think it actually is.
I'm concerned about the free market eating itself, and we have to save the free market from itself. But that it does kind of mean, how do you keep more mom and pops in business so that you don't end up with just one cookie company and one candy bar company that have to be propped up by taxpayer dollars if they ever get in trouble, because we'll lose a whole aisle out of the grocery store.
Well, I just learned about a whole it's a nonprofit that is dedicated, and I'm sure there's more than one. I'm sure there are many out there that are dedicated to the small town shopping local phenomena and all the little stores, sort of pushing back against the Amazons of the world or the Nabiscos or Mondelez of the world. I have a question. Are those workers protesting in the United States or in Europe?
Yes.
Because in my experience in Europe, they protest the weather.
Yeah.
No,
And
they're
they
on
build
strike.
fires and they strike. And
In fact, there is a Nabisco bakery in Chicago that is on strike. But I didn't know. I don't know if you knew this, Jason, because it's very close to you. There's a Nabisco bakery in Naperville.
Yeah.
I knew that.
It's right on Ogden Avenue.
Oh, that's the one. They
Yeah.
make wheat thin. No, they make Triscuits. They make Triscuits. That's where Triscuits come from. So, and they are not on strike. So the Triscuit supply is okay.
It's safe.
Because, Napervillians are so secure, upper middle class. It's like, we don't even need to get paid. We're fine.
Well, you're saying that Oreo is now too big to fail, but the irony is that Oreos made Americans too big to walk. Like half of us are in mobility devices now.
Oh, wow.
Sky, you hit that one on the nose.
Wow. Okay. I got to move on to other bad things. I'm a little concerned about the Oreo supply and just what it says, for the state of everything. Because now I'm a big Kit Kat fan. I like Kit Kats. But now it's like, okay, which variety? It's like Wendy's with the Frosty. And they say, do you want a vanilla Frosty or a chocolate Frosty? And I say a vanilla Frosty is not a Frosty. It's an abomination. A Frosty is chocolate.
You're upset that they offered 2 varieties. That's too much for you.
It's like what? Yeah, because what's next? What, butterscotch Frosties?
You
Strawberry
sound like a Frosty
Frosties? Hey, that sounds kind of good. Yeah. Frosty. I also like Frosty the Snowman and like him to beat up all the other Christmas specials. So yeah, maybe there's a theme there. It's like something you always say, Sky, that I was about to say, but I completely forgot what it was. When that research about where some decisions that were in the background now become in the foreground. And I have to go into I'm looking for Oreos and I have to go in and say, oh, wait a minute, which Oreos? Which ones do I like? Are these the right ones? Do I like double stuffs? Do I like Oreos thins? Do I like golden Oreos? Do I like lemon Oreos? Do you know what my brother did? My brother is our cruise director for our family reunions in Michigan. Because he's just, I don't know why. So we played a game this year where he bought every variety of Oreo he could find, which was like, we had 12 varieties of Oreos. And he laid them all out in the dining room. There's 22 of us there. And then we all went around and tasted each variety and then voted to find, which included, I don't know if you know this exists, but Lady Gaga Oreos.
What?
No, seriously?
Is it raw meat?
That's what I said. Does it taste like a meat dress? No, my first comment was it tastes like mascara and ambition. But it doesn't. It's just kind of sweet. So there's 22 of us going around the table tasting, 15 different Oreo flavors and voting on them. And Lady Gaga Oreos did not do well. The ones with chocolate in the flavor, like there's a s'mores Oreo, they were way up there on the top, and a peanut butter chocolate Oreo, and they were way up on there on the top. Birthday cake Oreos, not so good. Carrot cake Oreos, no.
That's a real thing?
Yes, my comment was these taste too much like carrot cake. And I like carrot cake, but I don't like it in the shape of an Oreo. That's not a good.
What is the point of that exercise?
Have you had the Pop Rocks ones?
They're Pop Rocks Oreos.
Those ones are weird.
They're not Pop Rocks brand, so they can't call them Pop Rocks. So we didn't know to expect it. And suddenly, is your Oreo exploding in your mouth? Or am I just having an allergic reaction?
I love Pop Rocks. Now I'm going to go get me some of those. I don't really even like Oreos, but maybe if I like Pop Rocks, I'll like the Oreos.
The other thing that we do now every year, the new tradition that my brother is also in charge of, is we do the same thing with cereals. We look for promotional cereals, limited edition cereals, or seasonal cereals that you've never had before. We buy as many of them as we can. And then we play a game that my brother named Spoons Up. And to play Spoons Up, he selects a cereal that none of us have ever had before. He wraps it in a blanket so we can't see what it is. Then he gets out 20 bowls and puts a little of the cereal in each of the 20 bowls, pours a little milk. It takes some prep. Time. So a little milk, a little cereal in 20 bowls, 20 spoons. Everyone gets their bowl, their spoon, their little bit of a brand new cereal. And everyone then discusses it. What does it look like? What do you think it should taste like from the look? What does it smell like? And then he says, spoons up. And everyone takes a bite. And then we discuss. And we do like 2 different cereal flavors a night. And at the end of the week, we have to go back and say, what was your favorite? And that's fun too. Like Minion cereal. What does Minion cereal taste like? It looks vaguely Minion-ish.
Despicable.
Yeah.
Now that should be a podcast. We got to get rid of the Holy Post and just do that.
It's called Spoons Up. And it's my brother.
I love that game. That's a great tradition. But I have one question for you, Phil. What I wonder is all of that change that's bothering you really about change? Like, is it that you like things the way they are in the olden days? Are you becoming this crotchety old man where, back in my day, we only had one Oreo and,
and
what do you kids
happy with it?
Right. Is that it? Is that you don't like change?
Yeah, and my grandpa, his Oreos were just 2 pieces of bread with pig fat in the middle. I didn't have Oreos yet. I hadn't learned how to turn those basic ingredients into a delicious cookie yet, so we had them in their raw form.
It's a little bit what's happening in America overall. I don't know if you saw the census data that's been coming out, but
oh yeah, it's been interesting.
I think the largest growing group of Americans are people who don't fit in any single category. People like me.
I think the largest growing group of Americans are Oreo flavors.
Well, that's my point, though. Is it used to be you could easily categorize people as white, black, Hispanic, whatever. And now it's getting super messy and complicated because of all the mixed marriages and stuff.
You just
and
look
some
at
people
just
can't handle it.
I don't know. Carrot cake, Lady Gaga. I don't know.
Do you think one day there will be a section on that, ethnicity form we all have to fill out every time we sign up something that will be just mixed ethnicity,
or unknown, or don't want to answer is
that's
a current
I
one.
faced that dilemma when I was applying to college. Actually, Miami, my alma mater, had that question on the entrance form, but they only let you select. This is back in 1993. They only let you select one item, and I didn't select any because I didn't fit just in one category. And I wrote my whole essay about how their application process is flawed because it assumes people like me are an aberration and not legit. So obviously that's changed in the years since. But at some point, these census forms and other documents that ask for your racial identity it gets so ridiculously long because so many people are so many different things.
Right. So between saying what's your ethnicity and then what's your gender, it's going to be like a 10-page form. Okay. Can I go on to the terrible things that are happening?
Oh, goodness. That was so fun. We turned something terrible into something fun. Do you think we can keep doing that?
But Christian, not all of life is fun.
Don't tell me that, Phil Fisher.
I don't know if you're aware of that. It's not always fun.
I like making the lemonade out of the lemons.
Yeah, I know. My dog died last week. So that's not fun. We talked about it before the show.
We did, and I said I would have stuffed him with fluff and kept him around as a fluffy, happy buddy because he's so cuddly and fluffy. And
so
then
creepy.
He would have made you happy because you could have.
Why not just stuff them with Oreos and make them in a pinata where you can just crack them open every once in a while and see what flavors come out?
I'm just gonna keep going. We could have him. Someone could sculpt him in ceramic, like a big cookie jar.
Yeah, but then he wouldn't be the cuddly
he wouldn't
buddy
be fluffy
that we.
No. Anyway, Buddy went to wherever dogs go in the new kingdom of dogs. Can we get into the theology of dogs? What happens to dogs?
Yes, all dolls go to heaven. Haven't you seen that movie?
And cats don't dance. That other movie. Okay.
All right. What's the bad news, Phil?
Okay. Well, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but Afghanistan, Haiti,
don't even get me started.
Haiti, earthquake, wildfires all over the place. Like half of Oregon is burning. California is burning all over the place. There's a wildfire in Siberia that's bigger than all the other wildfires on Earth combined right now. Floods, Turkey flooded. Middle Tennessee just flooded over the weekend. Heat waves. July was the hottest month in human history since we've been able to record temperatures. Canada a few months ago set their all-time high recorded record. A couple weeks ago, Death Valley, California recorded a temperature that tied the highest recorded temperature on Earth in history ever. There's no water. We're running out of water. The Hoover Dam is like a third empty, and the other big one up in Oregon, they had to stop generating hydroelectric power because the water level fell too low, and they got to cut water for Arizona. Sorry, Arizona, no more water for you next year. Sorry. It's kind of crazy.
You forgot that there's a tropical storm that hit Rhode Island, was it?
Oh, yeah, tropical storm that hit Rhode Island.
Well, there was also one in Florida. It was Henry or something. I mean, yeah. I don't remember the name of it.
I really don't know what to think. So some people said, "Oh, I can't wait to hear you talk about Afghanistan." So we said, "Well, let's try to get somebody in who knows what they're doing." So
can I say something about Afghanistan?
Yes, you can. Say something about
Since I'm the only one on this podcast that has a tiny little bit of experience here.
In Afghanistan?
Well, I have a son that fought in Afghanistan.
Oh, I forgot he was there.
And I had a son that was extremely scarred by being in Afghanistan because he was nearly killed. That's where he got his Medal of Valor. And he lost a very good friend there, and several, but there was one of them that was a very good friend of his. He also led a Bible study there where he had some Afghan people in the Bible study. And he had a little boy that he was friends with who would ride by his guard post every day on a little red bike and wave to him. And he had developed this relationship of them just waving to each other every day. And one day, this little boy on the bike was riding by, and these bad guys came to grab him. And over there, when bad guys come to grab little boys, it is not a good thing. And Hunter knew that, and he requested permission to take out those bad guys and was denied. And he had to make a choice in that moment. Do I protect this little kid and risk, being court-martialed, or do I obey my leadership? And it was this terrible, horrible place where he was. And he ended up, listening to his leadership, and he never saw the kid again. And that was incredibly traumatic for him. And so he was over there for, over 9 months, and he saw all of this. And so he has been in serious crisis since this happened because, it feels like to him and many veterans that everything that they did over there was for nothing.
Right.
And it was for naught. And I understand the outrage, on the part of veterans and the hurt, and the abandonment that they're feeling. And I know there's probably veterans that are listening, and there may even be those that fought in Afghanistan that are listening. So I just want to take a moment and say that what you did over there was not wasted. And God uses everything, We don't know what the end of the story is, but we know that our God is good. And we know that he cares about people all over the world. And ultimately, we have to trust our God with these big events, these bad things. Bad things happen in this world. They happen to people, and they happen to our planet, and they have for a millennia. But ultimately, God is in control of those things, and we have to trust him. And so for those of you that are out there hurting, I would say, please contact your leadership. If you had some leaders that you listened to, please do that and talk to them about the pain that you're in. And don't lose hope, because God is our hope and he will be there for us. So that's my word on Afghanistan.
Wow. Thanks, Christian. I appreciate
You're welcome.
that.
I'm sorry for taking time, Phil.
No, that's okay. I'd forgot about that story from Hunter.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. And it's out there on the internet. He wrote it on Reddit. It's called The Boy in the Red Bike. So if you want to look that up, you can. And I would just say keep Hunter and all of those other people in your prayers. They're in a crisis right now. I mean, they were talking about doing a GoFundMe and getting all of the veterans together with the GoFundMe and going over there and standing up for all of the Americans that are being left behind. I mean, they're in serious crisis right now.
The story you just shared about the boy on the red bike, as touching and traumatic as that is on a very small scale for Hunter, it's it's a fitting analogy for the entire country, right?
Yeah.
Where the whole country is being taken over by the Taliban again. Many Americans and American allies are at risk, and the U.S. is basically doing virtually nothing. Right, they're not allowed to
Right.
because the policy is to for. I had a long discussion with David French about this, and we're also going to have an interview in this episode with Matthew Soerens from World Relief about how people can actually help and why the situation of trying to rescue people out of Afghanistan, both American citizens and American allies, is so important. So I hope people stick around and listen to that, because there are tangible things we can do to help right now, even if we aren't going to go back in militarily and really try to repair what was broken in that country in the first place.
Right. Can I say I do not understand the Taliban. I don't understand why. I mean, who is excited about, yay, the Taliban is back? No one is excited.
I think the
But no
Taliban
one
is.
But how can there
yes.
be that many of them if no one wants them? I don't like, when you see a picture of Taliban leaders, they never look happy. They look grumpy. They're grumpy guys in beards, and they say, they like no music, no fun, no parties, no singing, no dancing. They're like a cartoon version of the villain from, that children's film that you hated when you were a kid. Like,
Footloose.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
yeah, like everything that's fun, we're going to make it illegal.
Yeah.
So how do they take over a country?
Because they're all male. It's a male-dominated society. How far is this? I mean, the majority of them, they want control. But at the end of the day, Phil, we can't understand crazy people. How?
I
But
can.
they can't be that there can't be that many crazy people to take over a country.
I don't
Well,
think they're
clearly.
crazy. I
So
don't think they're crazy
they
at
have a
all.
logic. I just don't understand the logic of, we're way too many people enjoying themselves. We got to do something about this.
This is religious fundamentalism, kind of 101. These are people who
Yeah.
believe that they are constructing a society the way God intends it to be. And if you are serious about your religion and you're serious about trying to honor God, and you are enculturated into the Taliban's way of thinking, then this is a great victory. This is returning the country to the way it's supposed to be, and get these crazy Western capitalist infidels that are giving women rights and bringing in 40 different varieties of Oreos out of our country. That's the point.
That's
so
right.
I think
And
there
they
are a
have
lot of
that
people.
they have that big of a following.
Yeah.
That you can take over a country in 10 days.
Well, they didn't in 10 days.
It
They've
wasn't
done
in
it
10
over
days.
months. This is what the media is not
Months.
really reporting, is when
Okay.
the Trump administration struck their deal with the Taliban and promised that the U.S. would be gone by May 1st, and then Biden switched it to August 31st. Right after that deal was signed, the Taliban started moving into different provinces around the country and taking over. It wasn't until the very end where they decided we're going to now move on the capital, and it started hitting all the television screens and everybody started seeing what was happening. But they've actually been executing people, killing allies of the US, and taking over different parts of the country ever since that deal was signed in 2020.
Yeah,
Man.
when even back further than that, if you think about the Obama administration, I mean, they've been drawing down over a course of a long time. And as they would draw down, our forces would draw down, they would take a little bit more ground. And so what would happen with each administration, they would say, okay, we're going to withdraw our troops. And they would begin withdrawing things. And, things would spark up. And the presidents would realize, even Obama and Trump would realize that, okay, it's more complicated than we thought. And we can't really pull everybody out. And I think the outrage that people are thinking about is they did not expect, Biden to actually go through with pulling everybody out and, thinking through all that. So, and I would say too, what I'm, from my own personal perspective with how American forces in Normandy really impacted the lives of those French people. I would say that, our presence there really did change the lives of individual Afghans on a, small level all the way to a broad level. And I think those people that were over there, the military people that were fighting for them and helping them, saw that. And I think that's why they're so angry that we would just abandon them, particularly the Afghans that helped us.
Right.
A couple, just before we move on, Phil, I again encourage everyone to stick around and listen to the interview, but also we'll release the David French interview somewhere along the lines here, first probably to our Patreon subscribers. In the last 7 years, do you know how many American troops have been killed in Afghanistan?
Not many.
In the
I
last
know it's
7
not very
years, it's
many,
been
but
66 people.
Yeah,
So
66.
you're averaging less than
okay.
10 a year, and not to minimize those sacrifices in any way, but it wasn't like there was some horrible American loss of life that necessitated getting out of this country as
Right.
urgently as we did.
Right.
And the cost, and David
Right.
French brings this up, the cost to future U.S. military engagement, because now we have a proven track record of abandoning our allies in Iraq, the Kurds, now Afghanistan. The likelihood of American troops going into another country in the future and making significant partnerships and get allies is minimized because people know we will abandon them. And that means in the future, this is ultimately going to cost more US lives and more US troops, not fewer. So I think, I mean, I'm no expert, obviously, in any
Exactly.
of this, but in my research of this, I think all three administrations, Obama, Trump, and Biden, own responsibility for this. And
Agreed.
ever since bin Laden was killed, there has been an effort to try to get out of Afghanistan. And Trump finalized that deal. Biden executed it very poorly. And it was, I would argue, because the American people have given up any moral obligation or sense of moral obligation to that country, and we just
Right.
abandoned it. So I don't blame the administrations as much as I just blame the American people for giving up on this. And it
Yeah.
is a betrayal of them. It's a betrayal of our own military, because they're going to be the ones who pay the price for this in the future.
Well, that's not encouraging.
No, and I would say too that, by doing that, by being this isolationist, going back into this isolationist stance of us first and protecting our own, we're ceding the ground that we've had, the leadership role that we've had, in the world. And that's truly tragic because as we know, we have a lot to offer the world. And, when we just pull into ourselves and we take care of our own, I think it's being irresponsible with the gifts we've been giving.
Right.
That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I saw one headline that just said this is officially the end of Pax Americana. That we are no longer attempting to bring an American peace to the earth. And one commentator said, "And it's about time." Others said, "And this is a huge problem for the world." So obviously, people have very different perspectives on isolationism versus interventionism, and is it our job to make the whole world better, or should we be putting America
And
first?
there is a bound, I would say, as in every other argument, somewhere in the middle is, would be the balance.
Right. All right. Shifting to the other parts of that, the climate stuff, the wildfires. We got a really bad report from the UN a couple weeks ago about climate change and that it's going faster than we thought, and it's getting worse than we thought, and it's going to impact more people than we thought. It seems like very few people today are denying that things are changing, because it's hard to do that when you got water up to your knees, or you can't grow almonds anymore because there's no water to water the trees. So and then we've got the pandemic, and the responses to the pandemic are also interesting. So someone wrote a piece, Phil Zuckerman wrote a piece in Salon, not a Christian publication, not a Christian journalist, says staunch atheists show higher morals than the proudly pious from the pandemic to climate change. When it comes to the most pressing moral issues of the day, hardcore secularists exhibit much more empathy. He talks about the global pandemic and the rapid warming of our planet. These dire phenomena are, above all, deeply moral matters in that they both entail care for the well-being of others and a desire to alleviate misery and suffering. In our nation today, it's actually the most secular among us who are exhibiting a greater moral orientation in the face of deadly threats than the most devout among us, who are exhibiting the least. And then he clarifies how he defines the most, devout and the least devout. The most secular, he says, I mean atheists, agnostics, people who never attend religious services, don't think the Bible is the word of God, and don't pray. By most devout, I mean religious fundamentalists who believe in God without any doubts, who attend church frequently, who consider the Bible the infallible word of God, who pray a lot, and who insist that Jesus is the only way, the only truth, and the only life. When it comes to the battle against COVID-19, it is the most secular of Americans who are doing what they can to wipe it out, while it is the most faithful among us, especially nationalistic white evangelicals, who are keeping COVID-19 alive and well. For example, a recent Pew study found that while only 10% of atheists said they would definitely or probably not get vaccinated, 45% of white evangelicals said the same. And then on climate change, it is the most staunchly secular among us who understand the science behind climate change and want to do what needs to be done in order to prevent it, while it's the most pious among us who dismiss the science and don't want to address the dire threat. For example, a recent PRI study found that over 80% of secular Americans accept the evidence that human activity is causing climate change, and they place addressing climate change at the top of the list of their political priorities, while only 33% of white evangelicals accept such evidence. So 80 for secularists, 33% for white evangelicals, and thus place it towards the bottom of their political priorities.
Okay. Can I reframe the argument he's trying to make here?
Yes.
Because the way it's framed in the article, it sounds like religious people are immoral and non-religious people are moral. And I don't think that's what the data is actually saying. I think what the data is really saying is that non-religious people tend to believe scientists, and highly religious people tend to distrust scientists. So the real issue is who sees science as authoritative and who's skeptical. And then based on where they put their authority, they act in what they believe to be a moral manner. So I wouldn't argue that one group's more moral than the other. The difference is where they root their authority structure in.
Right. Good point. Okay. But then he extends it to who is more pro-gun in today's America? Not the hardest of atheists. Rather, it's the most fervent of Christians. While 77% of atheists are in favor of banning assault rifles, only 45% of white evangelicals are. So that's not a science issue, Sky.
It is kind of a science issue.
No, it's not a science issue. No.
I think that
Why is it a science issue?
Because I mean, I've had these arguments on social media before and they're very taxing, but when you look at the data on gun deaths in this country, I think, and compare it to what happens when guns aren't accessible, both not just violent deaths in the form of criminal activity, but suicides by firearm, the overwhelming evidence says that removing these from circulation lowers the number of people who die. And the argument that the other side wants to make is ignore the science. And in fact, there's been bills passed in Congress that won't even let the government study the issue of gun deaths and violence in the country. And they just want to stick to their right. So once again, it's a suspicion of evidence and expert opinion.
But they don't start out suspicious of the evidence. They ignore the evidence because it conflicts with their ideology. They start out with ideology.
Right.
Right.
Here's the difference. If people can agree on what a moral response would be, and then one group consistently rejects doing it, that would be immoral. But what's happening is these highly religious fundamentalists don't agree on what the moral response is because they believe the proliferation of guns in this country is moral. They don't see it as immoral. They believe that not wearing a mask is moral and denying a vaccine is moral. They're not doing it because it's immoral. They're doing it because they think it is moral. So the issue is not morality versus immorality. It's where do you place trust and authority? And that's where the breakdown is.
Okay, so how did we get here? And he goes through a whole other list, in terms of who supports helping refugees. White evangelicals feel that America has the lowest obligation to help refugees. Affordable health care for everybody. Who supports that? Not white evangelicals. The death penalty. Hey, we love that. We're more likely to support the use of torture. Corporal punishment. The most secular Americans exhibit the most care for the suffering of others, while the most religious exhibit the highest levels of indifference. That's his conclusory statement. I guess my pushback would be that if you go down to a more neighborly level, white evangelicals are extremely likely to come to the aid of people they actually know. If the neighboring town is hit by a hurricane, churches are all over it, trying to put the town back together. And we seem to care about, suffering among people either that we know personally or that we see in other parts of the world. We tend to care a lot about suffering. What we seem to mistrust is broad systemic issues that are promoted by the political left.
But can I say something also?
Yes.
I have seen a turn, and I think it does have to do with the media or what we see, because back in my day, we cared about the refugees. I mean, we're living in
Yes, we did.
Wheaton,
Mm-hmm.
where Wheaton brings all of these refugees here, resettles them. We have mission organizations, and when I was a tiny kid, we were going overseas and bringing people back. So we used to care about refugees and people that we
Do you want to know
didn't.
what? Do you want to know what happened there?
Let me know.
Because I do have a point of view on what happened there. In the 1990s, California became kind of awash in controversy over the browning of California, that there were so many, illegal immigrants coming from Latin and South America that they were taking over California. And so there were whole propositions that were promoted and a huge political outcry. That movement, the anti-immigrant movement in Southern California, produced voices like Stephen Miller. He came out of Southern California in that area. Then he was promoted by guys like Steve Bannon to get into the Trump administration. And Trump ended up adopting a very anti-immigrant, anti-refugee policy, which was guided by Stephen Miller, who became his policy guy on that. In the first year of the Trump administration, evangelical support for resettling refugees dropped 10 points just in that 1 year, which is astonishing to have a group of 10, 20, 25 million people have that big a swing in their view of immigrants. So it's one of those weird things where we kind of have California to blame.
That's very weird.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the other thing that happened, Phil, is that I do wonder, and I'm going to ask you and Sky this question. There was always, when I was growing up, this idea of, these natural disasters are God's way of punishing people for their sins, or sort of, righting the universe. I mean, I can remember when there was a big tsunami somewhere, I heard Christian people saying, well, clearly, this was a sinful community or country and they needed to be wiped out. And, then there is this sort of Darwin theory in the pandemic that I've actually heard people say, which is, God's in control of the virus. Those that are going to die are going to die. If they're the weaker ones and they need to die off, then they need to die off. We just have to, live with it. God is going to, his justice will reign. And so we don't need to.
Darwin. It's very not Christian.
No, but Christians seem to be adopting it subconsciously.
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah, they don't claim it as such, but it's sort of this, Old Testament justice view of God and sin and, right? Am I off base here, Sky?
No, I think that rhetoric is out there. But I mean, it's wholly unchristian. It's wholly unbiblical, but people are going to employ it. They always have.
So what do you do? What do you do when someone makes the argument and you have to respond of, I think we'd be way better off if there weren't any Christians in America, because they seem to be they seem to be the least compassionate people we have.
Well, okay, backing up for a second, though, and a number of those examples that you gave, I think what it shows, and I don't want to say this too many times, I don't think this is an issue of Christians are less compassionate. As you pointed out, when it's their neighbor that needs help, they're often the ones that rush in and help. Disaster relief, other things. I think what this is really uncovering, and I don't know how to say this without making it an overstatement, I think what it shows when it comes to issues of evidence and science, Christians sadly are far more likely to be deceived. And in the lies that they believe, they end up acting in an uncompassionate way.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when you believe the lie that immigrants and refugees are more likely to be violent and terrorists which is completely unfounded by the evidence. If you believe that lie, then it makes sense that I want to protect my neighbors and my country by banning immigrants and refugees. That's actually the compassionate response. If you really believe they're all murderers and rapists and, the stuff that Trump said. If you believe that wearing a mask actually does more harm to a person's health than wearing a mask, then the compassionate response is not to wear a mask. The issue is the deception and the lies are far more common among Christians than non-Christians when it comes to these issues of science and evidence. And that's the problem that needs to be tackled here. It isn't that Christians aren't compassionate or moral. It's that they're frankly being lied to and easily deceived.
Okay. White evangelicals are the religious group most likely to support the use of torture. Science?
No, that's just immoral and ungodly. Yeah, that's the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, I think that shows how much the conservative church was twisted by the Cold War, and then the embrace of American militarism post Cold War and through the Vietnam War, and then 9/11. And the fear of the other. That combination of they're coming to get us. So we're the good guys. America's the good guys, so we can't do bad. So even if we have to be a little rough to get the information we need to save lives, it's the moral thing to do.
But that's part of the lies and deception that, frankly, a lot of Christian leaders are guilty of pushing on Christian followers.
Is there any correlation between that thinking and why evangelical Christians are so in support of the death penalty?
It makes the world more right. I think it's a form of legalism. It's pretty easy to support the death penalty if all you read is the Old Testament. Like, oh yeah, they were killing people left and right.
Right.
God wants us to kill people.
And again, I think people have been fed the inaccurate data that the death penalty serves as a deterrent to violent crime when the evidence is overwhelming it doesn't.
But it makes sense that it would.
Right.
It makes sense.
On surface level logic, it would make sense that, if someone risks execution, they're not going to behave badly. But that's not what the evidence has proven.
Well, this discussion, Sky, reminds me a lot of the series you've been doing on justice in the With God, because in that With God series, you're exploring the idea of justice and what a healthy biblical idea of justice is. As I've read it, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. And what I do think I hear when I hear white evangelicals agreeing with torture or the death penalty, I think, gosh, it sounds like there is a miscued idea or understanding of God's justice. I don't know, Sky.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, I think you are. And I just, again, it reveals how much of the American church has been shaped by cultural and political ideology, not biblical theology. I think you can make a biblical theological case for the death penalty. I don't think it's a good case, but you can make one. You cannot make a biblical or theological argument for torture. You just can't. And that's the stuff that is kind of, or like you could make a biblical theological case for securing the borders and immigration reform, but you can't make a biblical case for turning aside somebody who is a refugee looking for asylum from persecution in Afghanistan, for example. You can't.
Right.
So that's where you can make these thin arguments based on Christian faith, but a lot of these views have no basis in Christian faith at all.
And I think when you look at some of the research on belief and you realize, okay, there's a lot of space on some issues between the biblical position and the white evangelical position, there is almost no space on any issue between the Republican position and the white evangelical position. So as a group, we seem to be conforming our beliefs more to what is, a political party than the Bible. And that's sensitive to poke at with people, but we kind of, because you can look at, here's what the Bible says about this issue. Here's what the Bible says about this issue. Now, your belief actually is really tight, not to the biblical position, but to the conservative political position. Is that a red flag?
Well, and here's the other red flag,
or the left position. If you're really tight with the positions of the Democratic Party more so than the positions of the Bible.
The other red flag is, as the church, we are supposed to be people who are claiming to represent the truth of God, and that truth being the person of Jesus Christ. But if in almost every other area of social engagement, it's you can prove that Christians are buying into flat out lies and untruths,
Right.
why would anyone believe us when we say we have the truth about God? So truth matters, and it matters not just in spiritual religious issues, it matters on all issues. So when the people most susceptible to deception and lies stand up and say, "Hey, but you should believe us because we have the truth about God," why would
Right.
anyone listen?
The
The
governor
credibility
of
is shot.
the governor of Tennessee just had to issue a statement that no, in fact, people aren't injecting cows with the vaccine so that you would be vaccinated by eating their beef.
Oh my goodness,
The
seriously?
governor had to say that. Like, no, that's not happening. And that wouldn't even work if it did happen.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
yeah, we're getting a little loopy. Okay.
So can I just ask you, Phil?
Yes.
That article is very disheartening and discouraging, almost more than all the other things you rattled off, honestly. So what was the conclusion of that? What are we supposed to take away?
From me or from the guy?
From the guy. What did he say?
Oh, the guy says we need to make sure that our citizenry is more secular and less religious.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's what he's arguing for. Is we need to be a more atheistic society to be more moral.
That just breaks my heart.
We need to be a society that cares more about the truth and roots out deception and lies and fake news.
Yeah, because he's very much slanting his argument towards the data that supports his premise, which we all do. I mean, it's very easy to just start with your conclusion, and if you believe religion is a curse on the world, you're going to interpret the data to support your conclusion. And if you believe that vaccines are evil, you're going to interpret the data to support your conclusion. We all do it. We just need to just take a second, take a breath, back up, read more broadly. That's one of the things that really concerns me is, when I'm interacting with my own tribe, white evangelicals, and I realize how narrowly they're reading. It's like, well, of course you don't know about this because they're never going to tell you about this. You need to read. Like I stopped watching all cable news because you have to pick one to watch.
Right.
It's very hard to watch 3 or 4 cable news channels enough time to get a balance of views. I can scan headlines from 30 different publications very, very quickly and easily and see how the same story is being slanted by different publications and then decide, who seems to be kind of in the middle, and I'll read that one. I can't do that with cable news, so I've just stopped watching altogether. And if just little steps like that, I think would be really, really helpful. Scan headlines across, everywhere from Mother Jones, whatever that is, magazine on the far left, to Fox News on the right. You get all their headlines and just read them all. And you get like, okay, there's a story in here somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where it is. So that's helped me a lot. And we need to help people do that better.
Well, and can I say one thing that I've learned, and hopefully this will help people have a little bit of compassion. Being with my dad and down in Mississippi for a month, I learned a lot of things from the inside. I've grown up down there, and so I do have some inside information of the way things have been over my lifetime. But being in there for that month, I learned things that I did not understand before, particularly with my dad. I now understand why so many older people are so connected to Fox News. And it's because, way back in the day when Fox News first started, yeah, it had the slant of the right there, but it was not the Fox News that we know today. But during that time, people began to watch that, and it began to be their channel, their trusted news or whatever. So over the course of all of those years that they've been watching it, it's just part of their daily life. I mean, in some way, and this is terrible to say, but in my father's situation, it would almost acted like a pacifier. When he was agitated or needed to calm down, the thing that he turned to was Fox News. And just having it on and listening to it was comforting to him. What he doesn't know that I do is that it seeps into who you are, especially for older Americans when they're not able. I mean, I just came back because my father was completely scammed by Publishers Clearinghouse and a number of all these other organizations asking for money and things like that. He couldn't determine what was true and what was false. So when you are in that older sector, you are susceptible to that kind of brain formation without knowing it. And so I really have a lot more compassion now for that. And I just think us allies, if we want to try to understand why this older white group of people can't process, accept, or think about any other news that's out there, I think that's part of the equation that we need to consider and need to have a little compassion about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I discovered when I was interacting with people who were, saying, how could you not support Donald Trump? First of all, they say, how could you support the Democratic candidate? And I said, I didn't say I did support the Democratic candidate. I just said I wasn't supporting Donald Trump. And they say, how could you not support Donald Trump? His policies are all biblical. And then I would bring up the refugee policy. And it was very clear they'd never heard of it.
Right.
It was like, oh, well, we shouldn't have illegal aliens here. No, I'm talking about legal refugee resettlement. Well, what's that? Why have you never heard of that? Because the news outlets that you look to don't cover that. It's not on. It's like it's not on the playlist of your radio station. If you only listen to one radio station and they only play 40 songs, then I can't really be mad at you because you've never heard this song. But I can encourage you to change the dial every now and then.
Judgment shouldn't be put upon the people who are deceived. It should be put upon the deceivers.
Satan.
Oh, for sure. I decided my next documentary is going to be on elder abuse and basically how everybody is trying to get money and stuff from these older people that can't discern the truth.
Wow.
It's horrible. What came to my father's house is horrible. So, and I made me mad at the deceivers. So you're right, Sky. Let's get mad at them.
Grr. All right. We have Matt Soerens, right? We have Matt Soerens talk about immigration again.
Specifically Afghanistan and what we can do.
Specifically, stuff is happening and we need to know how we can help. So, okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks for your support on Patreon and elsewhere. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.
My conversation today is with Matthew Soerens. He is no stranger to the Holy Post. We've had him on numerous times in the past to talk about issues of immigration. And he's back today to talk about the crisis in Afghanistan and what we can do to help the refugees who need to escape that country. Matthew Soerens points out that most white evangelicals in America today are actually against resettling of refugees, but he says that won't deter him or others from working with the sections of the church that still care about welcoming our neighbors who need help. Matthew Soerens is the U.S. Director of Church Mobilization for World Relief and a national coordinator for the Evangelical Immigration Table. He's also the co-author of a book called Welcoming the Stranger. Beyond our discussion about Afghanistan, he also updates us on what's happening with the Dreamers, those who came to this country as children but are still undocumented. Two things before we jump into the interview. First, Matthew Soerens highlights some practical ways that we can help Afghan refugees. You can find links to those resources in the show notes. And secondly, if you want to go even deeper into what's going on in Afghanistan, you don't want to miss my bonus interview with David French from The Dispatch. If you're a Patreon supporter, you'll automatically get access to that interview. And if you're not yet a Holy Post supporter, go to holypost.com and click Support Us, and you'll get access not only to the David French interview, but also to our monthly live streams as well as merchandise and other bonus materials. Okay, here's my conversation with Matthew Soerens. Matt Soerens, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Yeah, glad to be back with you, Sky.
You've been one of our more frequent guests, and part of the reason is this issue of immigration and resettlement and refugees and the border just is a perennial problem, I guess, no matter the administration or the season of the year. And the latest crisis, the immediate presenting issue is Afghanistan. So we reached out. I'm really grateful that you were able to make some time to talk to us about what's going on. There's some stats that have come out, and you've seen these over the years, that evangelicals are largely, white evangelicals at least, are largely not happy about resettling refugees in the United States. And yet this Afghanistan issue has brought the crisis to the forefront again. How are you talking to church leaders and evangelicals in general about what's happening and why we should care?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you're right. I mean, there's polls that suggest that, at best, maybe 45% of white evangelicals would like to continue to welcome refugees. But just, for World Relief, we've been doing this since the 70s. Like, it was really shocking for us to see public opinion among white evangelicals in particular sort of turn on this issue, because that's always been our core base of support in terms of churches that are welcoming refugees. That said, there's plenty of evangelical Christians in that 45%, and we're working with lots of them, and we have great church partners all around the country. But we would love for this to be a 100% issue. And so I think as we think about Afghans in particular, I mean, it's all the same biblical foundations of why we would care for any immigrant in terms of God's love for the vulnerable foreigner that we see all throughout the Old Testament, and just the theme of hospitality, which is a command of the New Testament. It's a requirement for leadership in the church in 1 Timothy and in Titus. And literally that means to be a lover of strangers. It's not just having your friends over for lunch. But I do think there's some unique dynamics with the Afghan situation just on a national level, in that, I mean, the most vulnerable people right now, and the ones we're concerned about a lot of people in Afghanistan, but the ones who I think have the most obvious case for why the U.S. has a moral obligation to evacuate people is those who are threatened by the Taliban because they were translators or in some other way serving the U.S. government, the U.S. military or USAID or some other part of the U.S. federal government. And we're hearing, I mean, literally in the last several days, just constant emails and phone calls and text messages and WhatsApp messages pleading with us, can you get us out? And that's not something that as World Relief we can directly do. That's the government. It's not even fully clear if that's the State Department or the Department of Defense. It's a pretty confused situation right now. But the situation is really stark. I mean, there's roughly 18,000 individuals, not including many more of their family members, who have pending applications for special immigrant visas, which are a visa that our Congress has created specifically for Afghans as well as Iraqis who are in the circumstance of having served the U.S. mission in those particular countries. And we're not saying skip over the vetting process, which we know takes some time, but if people are done with the process, they've been approved, get them out and get them to the United States. And if not, we've been saying they need to get to a third country, get them elsewhere where they'll be safe while you can finish processing, or to Guam, what's been done in the past.
Let's back up for just a second here, because I want to make sure people understand the implications of what's happening. And for argument's sake, let's just lay aside the Christian values and the biblical ideas of hospitality and welcoming the sojourner and all that. Let's talk purely pragmatically and politically. The United States 20 years ago went into Afghanistan in response to 9/11 to get rid of the Taliban and bring some stability to that country and hopefully prevent future terrorist attacks. Largely successful, at least on the future terrorist attack side of things. Many Afghans supported the U.S. in that endeavor, worked with us, translators and other various help. And when the U.S. decided to withdraw from Afghanistan last year, it was pretty obvious that these folks who had helped our country were going to be at risk. And this is not the only place this has happened. As you mentioned, it happened in Iraq. It's happened in other countries, South Vietnam, for example. The problem is, politically speaking, if the U.S. does not step in and help these folks and figure out some way to make them safe, whether it's taking them to another country or bringing them directly to the U.S., aren't we risking future U.S. military engagement in other countries if we have a track record of abandoning our friends and allies?
Yes.
This way? I mean, what happens the next time? And I'm bringing this up because there are a lot of white evangelicals who are very, very pro-military and believe the military to be one of the most important and integral institutions left in the United States. But this policy, at least what I see unfolding right now, directly undermines the safety and future of American troops.
Right.
So even if you don't care directly about the Afghans and their horrible situation that we should care about as Christians, I'm thinking just politically here, this is incredibly troubling for the future of U.S. foreign policy.
It is. I mean, we have made a commitment as a nation to these individuals that if you stand with us, we will stand with you. Frankly, these people have served the United States cause more than most of us have. I've never served in the military, but they have put their lives at risk. I mean, I was talking to a colleague yesterday in North Carolina who's spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. His life was saved by his translator more than once. And he's desperately trying to get him out. But not only on that human level, but as you said, on a foreign policy level, if we break this promise to these, more than 15,000 people who and their families, probably another 50,000 people that we have committed to, we will protect you. We're never going to, it will be generations that people will remember that broken promises. And frankly, our adversaries will remind people of those broken promises when there's a need for military intervention at some point in the future. And again, you brought up Vietnam. there's a lot of parallels to what's happening right now in Kabul and what happened in Saigon in 1975. One big difference is that President Ford evacuated 130,000 South Vietnamese U.S. allies to Guam, and eventually they came to the United States. And frankly, that's the origins of the U.S. refugee resettlement program. I mean, that's where World Relief got our start. That's in terms of refugee resettlement, it was Vietnamese arriving and calling around to every church who might possibly meet someone at the airport and help them get on their feet. And we're still doing that 40 plus years later. The situation is actually very similar in terms of the threat that these individuals would face. But if we turn our backs on them, there's a national security dynamic. And that's why you've seen a lot of national security experts. I mean, they're debating whether or not the U.S. should leave Afghanistan militarily. And, I'm not an expert to know the answer to that question. What almost everyone seems to agree upon is if you're going to leave, you've got to take care of the people who stood with you.
Right. So that brings up the question of how did we get to this situation? Because most people are aware that the agreement to completely leave Afghanistan was struck by the Trump administration before he left office. And he celebrated that arrangement and was a big advocate for it. He's done a 180 now because he realizes it's politically bad for the Biden administration. But the Biden administration inherited this policy. They didn't challenge it. They didn't turn around. They could have renegotiated it or come up with it. So they own it. Not trying to put it on Trump. But once they decided that, we're going to continue with the troop withdrawal, there were warnings that similar to what happened in Iraq, it's very likely that our enemies are going to overrun the country. And we need to have a plan in place. If we're not going to stay there, we need to have a plan in place to get these folks out. What fell apart here? Why wasn't there a plan to get our immediate allies out of Afghanistan in a safe and orderly way? Why is it broken down to such chaos, do you think?
It's a great question. It's hard to tell how much of this is incompetence and how much of it is indifference. And to be fair, there have been Afghans arriving in the last several weeks. It's not zero. We've been, in fact, our World Relief offices in Sacramento and Modesto, California, which is two of the communities where we've received the most Afghans because there's just large Afghan communities there. They've been busy for weeks, and they're, if you're listening there and you want to go volunteer, we really need volunteers. Hopefully we'll need them all over the country at some point, but already it's very busy in California and Seattle as well. But it's not the vast majority. It's been, my understanding, about 2,000 of those who had pending cases have been.
So is it a case of the collapse just happened a lot quicker than the government expected, and so there wasn't time to ramp up the evacuations?
That seems to be the case, but also, we were telling the Biden administration, and not just World Relief, but other faith groups, other refugee resettlement groups, national security advisors, veterans groups, months ago. When the Biden administration said we're pulling out by September or whatever their kind of arbitrary date was, we said, okay, well then we need to immediately have a plan for how you're going to evacuate people. And we got basically told, well, stay tuned, we'll let you know. We've been pushing on that for months, and there's been no real plan in place. And now maybe the presumption was the U.S. would hold Kabul for a lot longer than they did, which was, literally it fell over a weekend. Even then, though, we were raising concerns. Well, what about the people who are not in Kabul and who are in parts of the country that can't get to Kabul without passing a checkpoint for the Taliban? What's the plan there? And that's not even to mention, obviously there's a particular moral case for people who serve the U.S. military or other parts of the U.S. government, but we've got people who work for NGOs, people who are Christians or other religious minorities, frankly, just women in general. There's a number of categories of people who are going to be uniquely at risk as the Taliban is back in power. And of course, there's, they seem to have a PR strategy. They're saying they're not going to be quite as bad as they were in the 90s. I certainly hope that that's true, but none of the people I know who have ever interacted with Afghanistan believe that. And anyone who's there is trying to get out.
You may have seen this tweet going around from Steve Cortez. He's a host on Newsmax, which is an ultra conservative right wing, kind of to the right of Fox News outlet. And it's a photograph of the inside of a cargo plane leaving Afghanistan that's absolutely crammed with refugees. And there's no seats. Like, people are just standing in this open cargo plane. It's a remarkable photograph. But his caption is, "Raise your hand if you want this plane landing in your town." America paid unimaginable costs in Afghanistan because of the uniparty globalists who dominated the Bush and Obama administrations. No more. ... Uh, it's gotten over 3,000 likes as I'm looking at it, and a lot of retweets, 6,000 quotes and retweets. So it's obviously struck a nerve. But what do you say to Christians who are tempted to go along with that kind of rhetoric that we don't want these people in our towns?
Yeah. I think I probably responded a few different ways to that. I mean, I saw that tweet as well. My favorite kind of retweet of that, and I apologize that I can't remember who it was from, but it was a picture of the Statue of Liberty, raising her hand, if you will, saying, "Give me your fire, your poor, your teeming masses yearning to breathe free." Like, that's kind of part of who we are, or at least at our best, I think, as the United States of America. It's also worth noting that, to my understanding, that plane was going to Qatar, not directly to the United States. Like, they're evacuating people to different places, some of whom will need some more processing before they would end up in the United States. Some of whom may never end up in the United States, but it's important to get them out. Also, just from a practical perspective, I mean, I was on a call a couple weeks ago with a business group out of Iowa, basically saying, "Hey, we know you all at World Relief are in do refugee resettlement. Can you get us more of the Afghans who are coming? Because we desperately need workers in Iowa. And we have a huge labor shortage. And frankly, that's true in a lot of states right now. So there are all sorts of communities that, just on a self-interest economic level, not to say that they don't also share some humanitarian values, but just on an economic level, there are all sorts of parts of the United States that would be eager for refugees who are authorized to work from the day they arrive, or in the same as those who come on special immigrant visas. Frankly, the Afghans in particular, they served as translators often. So they come in speaking English really well. A bunch of them have master's degrees and high levels of education. So just on that level, there's plenty of parts of the United States that would love them to come. But then on a Christian perspective, and I saw that image, and my first reaction, maybe it was because it was what I was reading in the Bible yesterday morning, was the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, where there's this crowd of needy people. And the disciples' response to that is, send them away, send them back, because this is too many people. We don't have the logistics to care for this. And Jesus's reaction is different. He says he was moved with compassion, and then he tells his disciples to feed them. And of course, he finds, one little kid with some loaves and fishes, and that's enough when you bring Jesus into the picture to meet those needs. And frankly, there are enough churches in the United States. And I want to say, despite all the polls that are really discouraging on how anti-refugee a lot of white evangelicals are, there's also a lot of really amazing evangelicals, white and otherwise. I mean, we're overwhelmed right now at World Relief with calls saying, how do we help? I mean, literally, like, can we have someone stay in our house? Like, we'd be happy to open up our guest room, which occasionally we do on a short-term basis if we're, struggling to find housing.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, we're looking to get people into apartments and let them get settled in their own community. But they need friends when they arrive. And, that's something the church has done with refugees for decades. And we just think it's an important opportunity for the church to step up. And we're seeing that happen already. We're praying it will happen more so. There's financial needs. There's, we need furniture and household items. And then we need volunteers. So I think that's a huge opportunity for the church. And I would love for it to be the whole of the church, not just kind of the minority who has apparently read the same Bible verses I've read.
Okay, we'll get to some of the practical steps people listening to this can take in response. Before we get there, though, to kind of double down on some of the positive responses that are coming out of this, we're talking on August 18th. Yesterday, August 17th. Did I say October or August?
We're August.
Oh, yeah, August. Okay, sorry. Yesterday, August 17th, the Evangelical Immigration Table released a statement to President Biden. And for those who aren't aware of the Evangelical Immigration Table, this is a group of evangelical leaders from Bethany Christian Services, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, the National Association of Evangelicals, National Latino Evangelical Coalition, and your group, World Relief. And it's not a long letter, but it just basically calls upon President Biden to fulfill America's commitments to these Afghans who helped us for the last 20 years. Let me just read one paragraph. As Christians, we believe that each person is made with intrinsic value in the image of God, and we cannot treat any person's life as expendable. Our government has a particular obligation to those who are now facing threats upon their lives due to their service to the United States. And to go back on our commitment to them would be a moral failing with reverberating consequences for decades to come. I'm just encouraged to know that there are evangelical leaders out there who are willing to make these kinds of statements in the public square to the authorities, rooted in our Christian beliefs. And frankly, you don't have to root this in Christian beliefs. You just have to root this in good moral foreign policy, which happens to align with Christian beliefs. So thank you for leading that. Thank you for continuing to advocate for that. You mentioned some things already that people can do in the short term to help. Can you just direct us to websites or other places we can go to directly support your efforts and those of other agencies that are trying to move this forward?
Sure. Yeah. So we'd love for people to go to worldrelief.org, and you'll see a big thing about Afghanistan right on the top there. I'd say the big three needs right now. One is volunteering. We're not in every community, but we are in a lot of communities. And if World Relief isn't there, there's 8 other national refugee resettlement organizations. So it's the Catholic Church is the biggest of those. There's Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services. Most of them are faith-based. Church World Service, HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. So look up one of those organizations in your community if World Relief isn't there. Volunteering is a huge need. Financial support is also a huge need right now. The way the refugee resettlement program works and has worked for decades is a public-private partnership. So there are some federal funds that come with each refugee. It frankly is not enough to serve people very well. So we rely on support from churches and individuals. And then the third thing would be advocacy. We do have Afghans arriving already. We do anticipate more will be arriving, but I would say I do not have confidence at this point that the Biden administration is going to get out anywhere near the full number that ought to be able to come to the United States, or at least be evacuated to a third location for processing. So we've got a petition on our website that's basically calling on the Biden administration. And this is, Congress has a role here too, but frankly, they've done their job on a bipartisan basis. They've appropriated the funds to do an evacuation. They have cleared all the legal barriers that need to happen. The president has all the legal authority he needs to do an evacuation. I get that logistically, it may be very difficult at this point. It would have been a lot easier 2 months ago, but they still need to do the right thing.
It's a little surprising to hear that Congress actually did its job here, because that's often where you think the traffic jam is, right?
And often on immigration issues, I can talk about some other immigration issues where Congress has been negligent at best. But on this issue, it's been encouraging to see the bipartisan support. And again, it's not, this is like the veterans of foreign wars and the human rights groups that tend to be more on the left, and the, faith groups from mainline Protestants to conservative evangelicals to the Catholics, kind of across the spectrum. The Mormon church has been very outspoken. It's a little bit unusual to see this level of unanimity. And yet we're not seeing the president come through the way he needs to so far.
Well, let's hope that changes with all the pressure coming from these different groups. In the few minutes we have left, let's turn the corner from the immediate crisis in Afghanistan to the slow, ongoing crisis that's been around since basically the Obama administration around the Dreamers. So these are folks who were brought to the United States as children, undocumented, that originally there was hope during the Obama administration that Congress would pass comprehensive immigration reform that would give some kind of legal status to these Dreamers. That didn't happen. President Obama issued his policy giving them legal protection. Trump comes into office and all that goes haywire, and the courts get involved. And now we've had another change of administration. What is the status of Dreamers, and what are you hopeful for under this new administration?
Yeah, so the Biden administration has been clear that they support the DACA program, and that's encouraging because the Trump administration did not. But that may not be enough. There was a court decision. I'm actually in Texas right now. I was out of Texas about a month ago that ruled that DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that President Obama put into place, is illegal. Now, the judge there in Texas, Judge Hainan, he stayed the effect of his decision on people who currently have DACA. So for the roughly 650,000 young people, and they're not all that young anymore, some of them are in their 30s at this point, but who were brought as children to the U.S., they're not immediately losing their work authorization or their legal protection from deportation. But it's fairly likely that if this goes through the courts, that's where it's going to end up. And what it also did is it shut down any new applications for DACA. So, for example, we have a family friend from our church who she couldn't apply for DACA because you had to be 15 years old under the terms of the Obama administration's DACA program. She was, I think, 13 when President Trump shut down DACA back in 2017. And there has been no new applications allowed just until last December, when, because of some court decisions, the Trump administration was required to reopen DACA. She filed her application a month or two later, and it's still processing. And now the federal government has been barred by this court order from approving her application. So she's a high school senior at this point, trying to decide if she should go to college, and literally asking questions like, should I take on student loans to go to college when I may not be authorized to work and not have any real capacity to pay back these loans? And I don't have an answer for her. I mean, I don't know what to tell her, except for that I hope it'll get resolved sooner rather than not. But that, we talked about sort of what the administration can do versus what Congress can do. This is something that Congress can solve and ought to solve. And it's not that hard.
Is this a case of a it's only something Congress can solve, or if they don't, are we in a perpetual state of just one court after another going back and forth on this DACA question, or it changing depending on who's in the White House? Is the only real solution congressional legislation?
The only real solution that provides any sense of stability and certainty for people is legislation. Only Congress can change the laws that would define who can apply for permanent resident status, which is the prerequisite under the law for citizenship. And these are people who, they're American in every way except for on paper. I think we ought to find ways for other people who came when they were 40 to figure this out, and even if that involves paying some sort of a fine. But the case is really easy for someone brought here as a 3-year-old, like my friend Valeria. Like, she didn't even choose to come here. It wasn't her decision. Frankly, her life looks really different than her younger brother who was born here, just because of the place of birth. And that's something that I think most Americans get. We know that most white evangelicals actually, the polling's bad on refugees. Most white evangelicals support allowing dreamers to become citizens, which is encouraging. Most Republicans support it. Most Democrats support it. And we've really been conveying to our senators in particular. The House has already passed a bill that resolves this. We're now waiting on the Senate. And Senator Durbin from our state of Illinois has sponsored this since 2001, currently co-sponsored with Senator Graham from South Carolina. So it's bipartisan, but it's not yet sufficiently bipartisan where we are clear that we have the votes for it to pass.
So, 2001, that's 20 years. This has been sitting in limbo in Congress. Okay, if the majority of Republicans support this, the majority of evangelicals support this, if the majority of Americans support this policy, what is the holdup? Where is the pinch point in Congress?
So it's in the Senate. And what we don't have is the majority of Republican senators supporting this. In fact, we have a lot who will say theoretically, we need to solve this, but then they start fighting over the details.
But if you're correct that the majority of Republican voters support this, is it a case of the party's not actually following its own polling, or has the anti-immigrant rhetoric in the Republican Party just gotten so extreme that even something that a majority of people support, no politician wants to have around their neck because it could be used against them?
Yeah, there's a few dynamics there. One is that in a Republican primary, it's closer to a 50-50 issue, and the passion is probably on the anti-immigrant side. That is to say, or at least the anti-dreamer side. The other dynamic is what tends to happen with this is whenever you start talking about immigration policy in Congress, is it becomes this Christmas tree of what else could we hang on this bill? And that's where you can't pull together the coalition because, there are things that I think could reasonably be put together. We have issues at our border, and we've been really clear at World Relief for a long time. There are things we could do to improve border security and border management. Frankly, a lot of those go to a more functional asylum system. Frankly, like Senator Cornyn out of Texas and Senator Sinema out of Arizona. So again, Republican, Democrat, they've got a bill that we don't think it's perfect, but it's a pretty good bill that would really address some of the structural issues in the asylum program. I could see that being paired well with the DREAM Act, because a lot of Republicans are saying, well, we do support this, but we can't do it until we solve the border. Now, what solve the border means is a little ambiguous, and that's where, often they don't have a specific answer for what that would mean.
Yeah.
And if it's a wall at this point, well, you lost the Democrats, and then you can't, you need 60 votes to get it through the Senate in most cases.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too cynical here, but going back to the Afghanistan situation, it feels a little bit like in that Newsmax tweet, if there is a segment of the Republican Party that thinks accepting Afghan allies who supported the US military is unacceptable, I can understand why a significant part of the Republican Party would also argue that children who came here as undocumented immigrants is unacceptable. Like there seems to be zero tolerance in a certain segment of the Republican Party for anybody coming into this country for even the most legitimate reason. So that's a hard sell, and it's probably increasingly difficult when the rhetoric out of the Republican Party over the last 5 or 6 years has been so anti-immigrant and frankly often laced with a degree of racism.
There is definitely an element of truth to that. I mean, there's been in President Trump's administration, you had Stephen Miller, who was on record saying we don't want a single refugee coming in the country, and asked about, well, what about persecuted Christians? Zero. Like he was just against refugees, which is a very sympathetic category of immigrant. But I also would want to say there's also a lot of senators in the Republican Party, along with in the Democratic Party, who I think actually have a fairly reasonable approach to this. And some of them are just afraid of upsetting their constituents. So that's where advocacy is important.
Right.
Reaching out to your member of Congress, making phone calls to your senators and saying, yes, we should have secure borders, but we also ought to have a functional legal immigration system. We certainly ought to be taking more refugees. And we ought to find a way for those who are here unlawfully to be able to make things right with the law. So with Dreamers, they didn't choose here. It doesn't make sense to penalize them for that. Maybe it does, for those who came as adults. Make them pay a fine, but let them eventually have the chance to legalize their status.
Yeah, this is something I seem to hear frequently from people I engage with who have connections in Washington, D.C. They will often say things exactly like you just said, that there are leaders in Congress and the Senate who have very reasonable positions, but their voter base, their constituency is extreme, and so they can't risk alienating them. And you see that on the left as well. There are some reasonable Democrats on a number of issues that won't voice what they really think because there's this wackadoodle extreme left wing that will penalize them for it. And on immigration, it seems like it's the wackadoodle extreme right wing that's going to penalize just smart policy. So we seem to be hostage to the extreme ideologues on either side that can't do what the majority of American people recognize as not only good policy, but moral policy.
Yeah.
And I don't know where to put all the blame. Is it in gerrymandering districts, or is it in extreme media? Is it social media? Whatever it might be. But gosh, the reasonable voices like yours and others get lost in all this.
Well, I've definitely observed that and experienced that. But I also I'm maybe just a hopeless optimist, but I actually have a lot of hope that the church could play a constructive role here. Dreamers are a good example of that. I think particularly because so many Christians of diverse ethnic backgrounds know someone who's directly affected by this. Like it's, someone in their church who we're talking about them losing their ability to keep their job and support their family when they've been here basically their whole lives. They then become the people who can kind of cut through the political partisanship and say, this isn't about being a Republican or a Democrat. And then the challenge is to convince them that their voice actually could matter. And I think that there's a lot of cynicism about that. But I can tell you, having been in DC a lot, when there's hundreds of phone calls coming in about one issue, Senate offices pay attention. Mm-hmm. And I would say another resource, we've got tools from the Evangelical Immigration Table. If you go to evangelicalmigrationtable.com, there's a tab for advocacy. Literally, like, put in your name and your zip code so we know which senator to call. It will call you. We've got good tools to make this really easy. You'll hear my voice recorded telling you what to say, which is basically, please support a solution for Dreamers. Like it's not complicated. And we've seen that does really make a difference when we can convince elected officials that they have support / cover to do what most of them, not 100% of them, but most of them actually know is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you for coming back on and sharing about what's going on in Afghanistan and this bigger ongoing drama around the Dreamers. And we will be praying for your success as you advocate for that, and remind everybody to go to worldrelief.org. And you guys have stuff posted there that we can engage in directly and immediately to help with this crisis in Afghanistan. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out, Sky. We appreciate it.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/holypost. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.